Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Movers and Shakers, a podcast brought to you by Daphne. Here, we dive into the journeys of leaders shaping the tech ecosystem, learning the key steps behind building game-changing companies, along with the best practices in entrepreneurship and investment. My name is Erica. I'm part of the communications team here, and today I'm thrilled to be joined by our co-host, Damien Didier, Head of Sustainability. Hi, Damien. How are you?
Hi, Erica. Good, and you?
I'm good. I'm happy to be here.
Glad to be here, too.
In this episode, we have the pleasure of welcoming Hugo Rauch, who is a leading voice in European climate tech. After working at Microsoft here in Paris, as well as in Washington State as a finance and climate innovation fund analyst, Hugo founded New Wave, a media company dedicated to reporting on climate tech innovation across Europe that includes a newsletter and 2 podcast series, New Wave and The Swell. Hugo, we're so happy to have you here on the podcast. We're eager to learn from your experience as an entrepreneur and a voice in this sector. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. What people don't know about New Wave is that, Erica, actually, you helped me find a name. You were part of that story.
That's true. No, happy to be a part of it and very happy to have you here. Before I hit record, you said it was a little bit strange to be on the other side of the table. How does it feel now to be the guest instead of the interviewer?
I prefer asking questions, but look, I mean, I think it's fun to be on the other side as well and tell my story. I think it's much more stressful, and I now realize, what people go through when they are on the podcast. But I mean, happy to be here.
Good. Well, we're happy to have you, and you can ask us some questions as well. It's no problem. Before we get into your story as an entrepreneur working at Microsoft and founding New Wave, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? We want to get to know you. Who is Hugo? Where are you from? And what drew you, I guess, to climate tech and climate tech investment?
Yeah, that's a long story. But look, I'm Hugo. I grew up in Bordeaux in the southwest of France. I didn't have the most traditional childhood, I would say. I was a skateboarder when I was young, from the age of 8 to 18. So competed in Europe, in France, had sponsors, was part of the French team of under 18. All I thought about when I was young was just skateboarding for probably the first 18 years of my life. And then at some point I realized, okay, it's really hard to do a career in skateboarding. Mm-hmm. So I might have to go and do some studies. And, at the time, skateboarding wasn't part of the Olympics. There wasn't such a budget available. So I thought, okay, well, I'm not going to make it. I have to go and study. And then from there, it's basically like a mix of things, from like going to business school and then to university, getting into Microsoft as a finance analyst. But I guess the story about climate tech investing is quite interesting because it started with investing first. So in university, I started to listen to podcasts like yours, for example, and listening to stories of entrepreneurs. And I realized how amazing it is to have 2 people an idea, and then it gets funded and it gets going, and then ultimately becomes a large company. And I thought that was quite interesting. But then from a finance perspective, I was studying financial management, which was more like the later stage finance that you would study in school. And so VC was a weird asset class. Mm-hmm. VC was this thing where like they put 2 million on the table, the valuation is 8 million, but there's no revenue, there's no product. Wait, is there something actually like apart from 2 people? So I thought that was interesting, and that got me really curious. But at the time, for me, what was missing is, I guess I was looking at podcasts and people in the French ecosystem, and all of it was about productivity, CRM, B2B SaaS, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, I don't care really. Mm-hmm. Like I think the concept is interesting, but I don't think it's applied for the right purpose. And then I got into climate, and that's where like those 2 worlds merge at some point. Climate started with a few things. The first thing is I met someone, which I'm still with today and live with, who's very climate conscious. She's vegetarian. She tries to limit as much as possible her carbon footprint. So that got me a little bit curious, although at first I kind of didn't pay a lot of attention to it. The second thing is, through Microsoft, I had the chance to work for the Climate Innovation Fund. I say the chance, but really I pushed really hard to get there. And there I realized a couple of things. So one thing was I got access to a lot of data. Microsoft is also an LP. So I started looking at performance and I was like, oh, everybody was telling me climate is philanthropy, but now I have an Excel file in front of me and I see the result. I'm like, this is not philanthropy. This is like real VC money. So that kind of convinced me. And the second thing was to say, you meet all of these entrepreneurs and they're so passionate about what they do because they have a real purpose, like beyond money. And so that got me really curious. And from there on, I said, okay, well, that's going to be the rest of my career. I'm going to focus on climate and investment to try and support that transition, I guess.
Wow. So you went from skateboarding to studying finance and then with climate. Can you share with us what that experience was like working at Microsoft at such a big company and dig a little deeper in what you did with the Climate Innovation Fund? And I'm curious too, being French American, how was it working in France versus in the US for such an iconic company?
Yeah, it's completely different for sure. The one thing that stands out is the size of the campus. I think in the US, Microsoft in Seattle has about 50,000 employees.
Wow.
So it's basically like a city within a city. You have taxis drivers just for you to move between buildings. I mean, it's also really big. Like you can't do it otherwise because like if you move from one building to the other, there might be like 2-3 kilometers and you're still within the campus. So defense is massive for sure. Microsoft is an amazing company. I think, obviously it's one of the top companies in the world when we look at market caps and everything, but I think it is really driven by this purpose of like enabling people to do more with technology. I think that gives a purpose to lots of people in technology, although for me that wasn't enough. I was missing the climate components, but I couldn't say anything wrong about Microsoft. Actually, my experience was just amazing from the start to the end. Everything was perfect. A few things I've learned though from Microsoft and working in the big corporates that I think could be interesting for startups. The first thing is at Microsoft, I went through a finance rotation program, which meant every 6 months I started a new job. Mm-hmm. So you're basically starting from zero again, right? From there, what I've learned is being naive and just asking the questions as they come to your mind is a superpower. Because people have been in their job for like 10 years, 15 years, and they've been doing the same all over again, right? But you come and you're like, oh, why do we do it that way? Like there's a much more efficient way of doing it actually. And I think just like asking the questions as they come to your mind is really important. And if I compare that to entrepreneurship, I think entrepreneurs usually challenge the status quo every time they get into a new industry because they basically like, okay, well, look, they're doing it that way. That makes a bunch of money. I'm going to do another way and I'm going to do better. So I think just coming in a bit naive is always really good.
Did you feel the same way when you were in the States about Microsoft than in Paris, or was it completely different? The spirit, like, were you able like to ask as many questions as you wanted also here, or was it more about when you were in Seattle?
I think even in France, Microsoft still has an American culture. I think one of the recruitment criteria actually for Microsoft is culture. People have to fit. So as such, I think it's quite a similar experience when we think about the people. The one thing I would say about the US, though, is Microsoft is still an American company. So if you go around the office in Microsoft in the US, big decisions are actually being made, which means also that you have maybe more of an input into what's actually happening, versus Microsoft France is more of a sales subsidiary, if you will. So mostly commercial people trying to sell the product that have been built in the US. Okay. So big difference there because one is more delivering, one is more doing the strategy. So big difference there.
Okay, great.
The other things I've learned from Microsoft, just to continue on that, but I think knowledge is always in the people. So when you start a new job every 6 months, you quickly learn that you basically have to go around and ask as many questions as you can to as many people as you can. That translates well to a podcast, by the way. But I think it is always something that I will take with me, which is like, if you have a question about a specific industry or about a specific process, go and find the people. Talk to them 15 minutes, even 10 minutes is enough to understand how they think and why they think that way. And then a couple of things as well for startups. One thing is if you're trying to sell to a corporate, please, one, be patient. Second, try and find who's responsible for the process. I think one thing startups don't realize often is that corporates have some sort of like different ownership lines, right? So everybody is responsible for a specific part of a specific process. So if you're a startup, your goal is to actually find this exact person that's going to be able to approve what you're trying to sell to them. Whereas in startups, you basically are responsible for everything and anything, right? So that is also a big learning.
When you talk about knowledge is within the people, were you part of some communities before launching your own communities or podcasts or media?
I think I wasn't connected well enough to be part of communities. I think the first one was a climate coffee in Paris, because it's quite, well publicized by now. But it's not really a community. It's more a place where you go, from time to time and meet with people. I wish there was a tool that was, referencing all of the communities, maybe something someone has to build. But I do still believe that knowledge is within the people, which also is a part of the reason why I started the podcast.
Mm-hmm. Well, that was my next question too. Can you take us to the moment when you decided you were going to do a career pivot, go from working from a big company to starting your own thing? Bring us to that moment.
That was more of a long period of time. Because basically I worked for the fund in the US. Then it was the end of my finance rotation program, which meant I had to go back to France and take a job. I asked probably 1,000 times to work for the Climate Innovation Fund from Paris. Unfortunately, that wasn't quite the strategy. They have most of the team in the US. Actually, they only have one person outside of the US. So kind of had to, take a new job, which wasn't climate anymore. And I think when you find your purpose and when you find exactly what you want to do with your life, then everything feels empty or without a purpose, or I don't know how to say.
Like going back instead of moving forward.
Yeah, a little bit like that. Yeah, it's like it's like a meal without taste. Just it's there, great. You're gonna have some food.
Good analogy.
So I think at that time I was like, okay, I need to do something about it. I need to start planning for what's next. Obviously, if you're part of the venture capital world, you would know that it's incredibly difficult to get into. So I was like, okay, if I quit my job now and try and get into venture capital, basically I'm going to be unemployed for a long period of time and it's going to be very difficult. So maybe let's not do that. Let's assess the risk and let's try to do something. At that point, I was like, okay, I want to do something, but I don't have a lot of time. What can I do? And I thought, well, what if I were just to start a podcast so that it allows me to talk to people in the industry with a reason, because otherwise they wouldn't talk to me. And I would just say, okay, if I do that once a week, probably it takes me 1 hour during the recording. I was quite naive that I thought maybe it takes me 30 minutes to edit. Right, so I was very naive, but I thought, okay, it's going to take me overall 2 hours per week. I can do that. Amazing. So I thought, okay, well, then who do I want to talk to? Well, going back to the prior thing I was saying about like investing, I was like, okay, there are a lot of great podcasts about investing in B2B SaaS. Who's doing a podcast about investing in climate? Okay, well, I looked around in Europe and I was like, no one's doing it. There are, the Catalyst podcast in the US, for example, very famous, amazing podcasts. To be honest, I don't pretend even to compete there. But I was like, we maybe need a European version of that because people in Europe are not part of it. And so I thought, well, okay, that's part of where I can go. It's like finding those people. Do I want to talk only to climate investors or also to funders? Because, those two are different type of people and different type of conversation. And I thought, well, you have to do the startup way, which is like be super niche, be known for something that you can do really, really well, and then maybe expand. And so I thought, well, okay, I'll just do climate investors for now. And at that stage, there was a few things that came to mind, which was first, I was tired of hearing philanthropy, climate is philanthropy, blah, 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 like climate doesn't do returns. So I was like, okay, I'll prove them wrong. So I'll interview the people and ask them about numbers and performance. Obviously, I quickly realized it's difficult in the VC world to talk about that. But people were still willing to share their positive story. The second thing was to say, okay, well, I'll give just a voice to these people because I think it matters for the world to understand that you can invest in climate and make money, and also to identify the people that are clearly doing it. And the last thing, obviously, was to say, coming back to what I was saying earlier, to try and become a climate investor. Well, let's make a network. Let's talk to people around in Europe. Let's make a name for myself for something that's related to climate VC, but without being a climate VC myself. Obviously, I couldn't invest my own money. I didn't have it enough. And then on the other side, I couldn't join a VC firm because it's just no, you snap, it's not like you snap your finger and then you get a job, right? So it's okay, that will be a great experiment to get started. And then here we are, I guess, a year later.
And compared to the project that you had in mind at first when you launched the podcast, was there a day that you woke up and you say, oh, in fact, it's bigger than expected. It's truly something that I've built, kind of like it's a company.
Yeah. I think that will happen the day I've hired the first 2 people to work with me. I was like, what am I doing? Am I paying people to work with me? And by the way, the podcast is profitable. So I was like, I can actually pay these people. It's not like I'm putting myself in danger. But it's actually make enough money to pay people. That moment was weird because I was like, who am I? I'm 25 years old to pay people and give them a job and give them direction. I think at the moment I realized it's bigger than I anticipated. The second thing which was really weird is when I got invited to conferences as a media, and it was like, wait, am I a media actually?
Yes, you are.
Well, apparently, but that was weird. Going around with your small badge that says media and then New Wave written on it. I was like, okay, actually, I used to be in my room and then recording my small podcast and trying not to make too much noise, and then all of a sudden you're like, okay, physically in person with people at a big conference as a media, it's like, okay, that's just weird. But I think that really, those are kind of a couple of points where I was like, okay, that project just got bigger than I thought.
I hope you celebrated well.
Yes, you should be proud.
I mean, it's day 0. We have a long way to go. I mean, that's one of the things I realized as well is once you start getting that, flywheel, you always think that it's not good enough or that you're too small, and I kind of don't celebrate for now, and I celebrate in 10 years when it's big enough, right? So hopefully we get there.
No, I think one of my biggest lessons I've learned this year is to celebrate the small wins and to really take a moment and look at how much your project has grown. How have you been able to build it from the ground up? I love hearing about the evolution of New Wave, and I'd also love to hear about some of the mistakes that you made along the way. What are some things that you wish you would have done differently looking back to where you are right now?
I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is the name. So it wasn't always called New Wave. There was a prior name, and I think one of the learnings for me is just be a bit more thoughtful, because I came up with a name in 15 minutes and I thought, okay, that's gonna be it. And you can do that if it stays a small project. That doesn't really matter. But then when it starts to grow, I would go to, for example, conferences and would say the prior names, which I'm not going to say, and people would not be able to spell it correctly because it was just an invention in my mind. So that's one of the things I was like, okay, you should start again and do a new brand. But that takes a lot of effort. The second thing that comes to mind as well is, obviously I didn't plan for anything. But if I were to start again, I would just take maybe 1 week to think it through. What is the workload going to be? What are the formats that I want to do? What are the top 10 people I want to interview? What does success look like? Stupid thing, but at first it was like, does success looks like the numbers on the charts, or is it more talking to the people I aspire to talk to? And now I realize I don't care about the numbers anymore. Actually, what matters to me is to have the best European climate tech investors and funders on the podcast. And if I do that well, then everything else is taken care of. So, some of these things where you go out and try something and then you build on top of it. But it's almost like this kind of baseline that you haven't got right in the first place and that you have to go back to at some point, which we did with New Wave, which, reminds me of that discussion with Erica, which was like, what should I do? Because I now have this brand and it sucks. I really don't like it. I want to change it. But what should be the new brand? And what is a brand that could be flexible enough so that if things changes a little bit, I can adapt to it, but also specialized enough so that people understand what it's all about. So that's some of the stuff.
You talked about attracting the best guests, who could be like founders or investors. Did you have a secret sauce, or did you have just a one message to send and to see, or did you try multiple times? Some people you reach out to connections? How did it work to attract them?
I mean, yeah, obviously, what's amazing in VC is like every VC has fear of missing out. So once you have enough of a backlog, then you can attract a lot of people. Not everyone, but a lot of people. When I started, it was really funny because I didn't know anyone in the industry in France. All I knew was the people I had met in the US through the Climate Innovation Fund. But I was like, I want to start something for European climate investors, so I'm probably not going to reach out to these people. The first thing I did was to open LinkedIn and type in climate VC and search for people that were in Europe, and then contacted probably like 50 of them and said, hey, I'm launching a new podcast, want to be part of it? I would say I probably have had 2 answers from this message. One was no, and then the other one was maybe. So that maybe I really pushed as much as I could to get on the podcast. And I think after the first episode, things becomes easier because one, you have something that people can look at and they're like, okay, actually, you've done something already. I know that person. Like it builds a bit of a trust. And then the second thing was to say, after each episode, I said, please, like, tell me who are the 3 people in the industry you admire the most. And oftentimes you get that recommendation and, you know, sometimes nothing happens, but sometimes you stop the recording and the person says, do you want me to connect me to these people? If they had a good time, they would connect you. And that actually unlocked, like a lot of people came on the podcast. They probably don't know, like probably most people don't know about it, but they came on the podcast because they were recommended by other people. And sometimes was just like they would share the email and, you know, just getting the email for me was already the entry point. Sometimes it would be more of a warmer kind of recommendation where they would do it for me. But, you know, I think that's a nice strategy to have because people know each other. It's a small industry in the end.
I think that was truly a great advice.
I
will apply it to myself.
New Wave has created a community of listeners. You have a community of guests that appear periodically on New Wave and then one-on-one interviews with the Swell. What are some of the key steps to building a community through a media company?
I mean, if I knew the answer to that. I mean, the one thing I've realized pretty quickly is like you have to be consistent in terms of messaging you send. So it's not to say that you have to say always the same thing, but if I'm going to start talking about climate investing and the next day it's going to be about B2B SaaS and then the next day it's going to be about health and the next day, you know, like that doesn't build a community because then you have lots of people. Exactly, right? Like a lot of people come to you and they're like, okay, I came for the climate podcast, but you're telling me now you're doing health. Like, well, you know, so I think being very consistent in the type of messaging you send. I also put a rules to myself, which was the first, I think, 30 episodes of New Wave were only climate VCs. I said, it's going to be climate VC only. People have to understand what they're going to get out of this podcast because it's a huge commitment. I mean, it's like 30 minutes or 45 minutes of people listening to you. Very huge commitment. It's not like a TikTok 1-2 second scroll type of thing. Like they actually commit to listen to it. So I kind of realized, okay, they have to understand what's in it for them, and it has to be consistent enough throughout the episodes that people understand what they're going to get out of it. But then from there, you also have to build differentiation between episodes because if you keep repeating the exact same conversation, then that doesn't work. So, and so that's when I realized the best way to do that is to ask everyone that I would interview, I would ask them, what is the thing that you're known for in the industry? Like that people know you for and come to you for advice. And that's going to be the topic for the conversation. Because if I can do that properly, then it is very likely that all of the episodes are going to sound and feel different, but have the same kind of consistency in terms of the narrative.
And do you know your community of listeners? Or do you receive like, I don't know, messages and that you can use to as input to your media? Or do they ask to interview someone specifically, or they know what they would come for, and that's what you were describing before?
That's a great question. I do receive messages probably like once or twice a week from people that either got a lot of value from it and just said, okay, I'm very glad you have this podcast and that it's free resource and blah, blah, blah. Then the second type of message I receive is, can you connect me to X? Which is a basic scenario. Like you've interviewed a climate VC, founders are looking for money, they want to have a connection. I don't receive that many messages of people asking for like new guests. What I do receive now, which is hilarious looking at it, is messages from comms or PR agencies trying to put guests in the podcasts, which
Fun,
looking back like 12 months ago, I was like trying to chase everyone in the world to get on the
Now they're coming
podcast.
to you.
So that's a bit hilarious. Although I would say it's always really difficult when you don't like. I much prefer going out to people and asking them because I know what I want to talk about with them. It's harder for me to do it the other way around. Maybe for now, maybe it will become easier, but I have a bit of a hard time with someone coming to me and saying, "Hey, like, do you want to have that person on the podcast?" And I'm like, "Yes, but what are we going to talk about? Because I don't know them." So that's maybe a balance to have. But I've done some episodes that came through that, and they were great episodes. So I mean, let's see.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if listeners don't feel the difference, it means that it was right guest.
Yeah, exactly.
And what's the one piece of advice you would give to someone who is looking to launch a media company, a podcast in this creators economy that's starting to really boom? What's the one piece of advice that you'd give to them before launching?
I would say think it through in terms of the workload and content. And that means two things for me. The first one is to make sure that you can do it for long enough. And I mean, I think I'm quite happy with the numbers we have now on the podcast and how it's growing. But as I said, it's day one. Like I'm going to do that for the next 10 years. And in 10 years, it's really going to be one of the biggest climate investing podcasts in Europe, I'm sure. But 12 months is not enough. So you have to find a format that you can do for long enough. And for some people, that means a very low-key format, like low-touch TikTok video, 30 seconds that they publish now and then. I've decided to go the podcast route, which about is quite time-consuming. So you have to be aware of that. The second thing I would say is find what you're specifically good at or you specifically enjoy doing. And that, for me, means, as I said earlier, I think for me, knowledge is in the people. So I want to talk to people. And that's how I learned. Like as I was referring to at my job at Microsoft, I would go to people, ask them questions and learn from them. If I had gone, let's say, doing a newsletter at first, I'm not a good writer. So the content would have just sucked, to be honest. And I know I have a newsletter and I can explain how I got into it. But I think, finding the line where you think you will be excellent because you either love it too much or because you're just naturally good at it is the thing that I would recommend. And the last thing I would say is define what success means to you. If success means doing millions of views, then you might choose a specific type of content. If success means making a lot of money, then there might be another type of content. If success means meeting the right people, that also is another type of content. So like trying to find what success means to you is really important. For me, that means meeting the right people and building that network. The rest, if I do that well and I have the best of the best in Europe, top tier climate VCs, top tier climate funders, I'm good. Like the rest will take care of itself. I know for sure.
Before going to the newsletter, I think you mentioned something quite interesting, and I have a question for you. Like you said, for the next 10 years, aren't you afraid of getting bored?
No, I mean, everybody has a story and a different story. And I think also, in general, climate tech is evolving really fast. We'll probably get to that in a minute. But I think what's fascinating with startup and innovation is that there's always something new.
Okay.
So like, I know we're not going to talk about the same topic in 10 years that we talk about today. Maybe some of the stuff will have come to life. We're talking about fusion sometime on the podcast. Hopefully in 10 years, fusion is there and we don't have to talk about it anymore. But there will be something new. So I think that doesn't matter to me. And that's also coming back to the idea of the format. In the format that we have, and that's partly the reason why I created this second format, is it started with an interview show, so one-to-one. The thing with that is, if I do it for 10 years in Europe, talking about climate investing, that's how many episodes? Let me do the math. Probably 500, a bit more than 500. I don't know if there are 500 people that are interesting to talk about from a climate VC perspective in Europe.
They can make a comeback in 5 years.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly, right? So that's why I created this second format, which is a weekly talk show where we talk about news, because the news is always happening. Okay. So there's always something to talk about. And so I'm not afraid of being bored because talking about the news, I mean, you see, like newspaper and have been there for a long time. TechCrunch and others have been killing it for a long time now.
And why did you launch the newsletter?
Couple of things came to mind. So the first thing is, okay, a podcast doesn't grow alone. So basically, no one goes on Spotify and search for Climate VC podcast. That doesn't really happen. The way people find podcasts is either through word of mouth, so someone has recommended to them. That takes a really long time. So if you're a bit impatient like I am, you can't just rely on that. The second thing is they find it on social media. So that's why I've created the LinkedIn account and post a lot on LinkedIn and trying to grow as much as I can, because if people hear about the podcast on LinkedIn, they will likely come to listen to the podcast. And there's a conversion rate that you can apply there. And in the middle of LinkedIn and the podcast, the thing is podcast, you don't really know who are listening to you. You just see some numbers, but it's very, very blurry. LinkedIn, you know exactly who's following you. In the middle of that, you want to have a mechanism that is basically trying to capture people in a way that is not relying on the algorithm from LinkedIn, because LinkedIn, you can do one post and do 10 likes and the other post do 1,000 likes. Mm-hmm. But that's also not like the podcast where you don't know exactly who's listening to you. And so the newsletter is a perfect middle ground for me, where basically you get email address, so you know who's subscribing to it. And it's a good way of making sure that every post gets on the newsletter roughly the exact same amount of views, because people open their emails. And you have like an open rate and blah, blah, blah. But basically, you know exactly how many views you're going to get on the newsletter. So that's part of the story. That also helps with sponsorship and everything, because then sponsors, you can sell exactly what's going to happen, while the podcast, people listen or not listen to it. And I can't do anything about it. And same for the LinkedIn post. It sometimes goes viral, sometimes not. But the second thing was, okay, well, now I know that I need the newsletter. What could I do? I'm not a good writer, so I'm not going to, write long analysis of, whatever sectors. It's not the type of work I can do super well. What am I good at? Well, I'm good at identifying the news that people are interested about, because that's what I do for the podcast. I do it anyway because I research for the Friday episode. Now I have like a bunch of data of like what I've found the last week is interesting, and I've selected a few topics for the Friday episode, but it's not my Notion. So why do I not share it with people? And so that's how I came up with the newsletter, was just to say, well, if I do that work anyway, I have to maybe structure it a little bit more to make it a newsletter, but at least it will give people access to information that I have, obviously for free. But I think it's a good way for me to, expand the media presence without doing so much more work than I already do today, because it's something I already do, right?
Yeah.
Like I would do it anyway.
You already done the work, so why
exactly,
not
right?
make it useful for everyone?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And can you share the name of the newsletter for those listening who might want to subscribe?
I think it's a New Wave newsletter.
Perfect. Keep it simple and easy.
Yeah, I'll share the link with you. It's a weekly newsletter, comes out on Monday morning. It's basically a summary of what happened in climate tech in the last week in Europe. So basically you have the news from startups that have raised money. You have fund news as well, commercial deployments. But I also try to incorporate there a little bit of like what I read during the week that I found interesting, or stuff that are a bit outside of that range of like just purely fund and fundraising, that I also share with people. So this week, for example, I shared a great report from Net Zero Insight. They've made a report about climate tech in Europe. I think that's always useful because I came across it, I read it, and I thought it was interesting. So why not share it with people?
Awesome. Thank you. Well, I'd love for us to talk a little bit about the climate tech landscape in Europe. As you said, climate tech is constantly evolving. It's moving quickly. And Damien, I'd love to get your insights too. What are some trends that you guys are seeing that you think people might be missing out on?
Damien, I want to start.
Okay, I'll be really brief. Climate has been a hype in 2021, 22, 23, and now it's a bit under the water and not the most trendy topic. It's AI, but AI can be applied to climate as well. And one of the topic I think is getting more and more attention is water, for instance, linked to climate, and how climate change will affect our usage of water, how we can still have factories running despite having droughts due to climate. It's a bit more on the adaptation side, I think, but I think that's one of the topic that is getting more attention.
Yeah, I think I have a bit of a different take on climate, because what I see happening is basically climate as a label itself is losing a bit of popularity. People don't want to call themselves like climate companies anymore, or climate startup or climate fund. I think that's on the back of a wave of companies that have been funded that haven't returned the performance that was expected from VCs. What I see, however, is a lot of companies now are not calling themselves climate companies, but they are still like, they are climate companies in my definition of it. They're just not putting the label. So I think about this company in the US called Base Power. And I take this example because it's massive companies. They've raised 1 billion at a 4 billion valuation. They're a battery company. If you look at their website, nowhere is written the word climate, CO2 emissions, CO2 reduction, whatever. What they're doing ultimately is allowing the grid to be more flexible and as such have more renewables. This is climate. This is clearly climate. The thing is, they don't talk about the word climate itself. I do believe, I don't know, I haven't talked to them. I wish I would, but I believe they don't do it because it's not sexy anymore for some investors, and people just don't care. Like VCs care about making their money, and then some people care about having an impact on the environment, but the first job they have is just to make money. Mm-hmm. So from there, it's basically saying, well, Base Power is going to make a lot of money. It's also doing really good for the environment. For me, it's a climate company. For them, they call themselves whatever. So that's the first observation. The second I would have is to say, and someone, I think that's Andreas Klinger from EU Inc. Told me that once. He said, climate was a label that was putting a lot of different companies and verticals into the same umbrella. But as those verticals got more mature, they kind of graduated from it and became their own verticals. So, for example, you would see right now a lot of companies calling themselves energy companies because energy as a sector is big enough so that it can be a vertical, as opposed to a few years ago, it was called the climate tech company. Mm-hmm. Same, but just a different label. Going back to what you were saying, Damien, on AI, I think AI has two main buckets, I would say. The one thing is how do we make sure that the energy that AI needs to consume is taken care of. That's the first thing. And obviously AI is very energy hungry. So how do we manage that? The second part is how can we apply it to the climate case? And I think what I see a lot of these days is AI applied to factories, for example, to make them more efficient and use less energy and have less waste. You see AI for new materials, for example. How can we rely less on other countries to produce materials? So I'm saying, for example, critical earth minerals, like we don't have them in Europe, so what can we do instead? So, for example, there's a company in Paris called Altrove, amazing company, repeat founders, went for entrepreneur first. They're basically building new materials that have never existed before to replace critical minerals with something that we can produce locally in Europe. And that leads me to the next thing, which is sovereignty. I think a lot of companies right now are mixing the topic of like Europe being a standalone continent that doesn't rely so much on other continents to produce outputs as well as climate together. And so thinking about Genomines that is trying to produce nickel from, not from mines, but actually grow nickel from plants, so extract it from the ground. If they can do that in Europe, then it means we can have access to nickel in Europe, which we haven't had before. This is both a climate case because it's much better than a mine, but also sovereignty. Also applies to recycling. A lot of companies like Récupère Metals coming out of Marble, recycling copper. We don't have copper in Europe, but we have scrap copper. So maybe we can do something about it. So, those things I think are coming together.
No, that's super interesting. I think what you've mentioned, it's quite true. They ditched the label. They went for mostly sovereignty because we have a sovereignty issue in Europe being autonomous in terms of like a continent. That's why also a lot of startups rebranded as resilience startup, acting for the resilience of the continent or the world. And it's funny because most of the company you mentioned, they worked on raw materials. And that's also what we see quite frequently, that the beginning of the value chain where we are dependent on the US or China, and that are really far away and maybe not using the same policies as we do to protect consumers and employees and workers. And we need to work on this in Europe. And have you seen with your talks with founders and investors that there are some gaps? Maybe if you compare to the US and to China or anywhere else, gaps that EU need to work on and to make big bets.
Yeah, I mean the one there are three things that comes to mind. The first thing would be having a standalone kind of startup legal entity that you can apply throughout Europe. I think the EU Inc. That Andreas Klinger is working on right now, super important. Big gap in Europe because it's difficult to move from countries to countries. So like that's slowing down startups basically. So that's one of the big gap. The two other things that comes to mind is from a capital perspective. What I've heard a lot from LPs is, because I also have LPs on the podcast, is we have a lack of growth stage capital. And that actually is confirmed from a data perspective. I was talking to Dealroom on the podcast last week. They said that about 50% of capital at late stage is coming from outside of Europe. So meaning that basically 1 out of 2 euros that invested at late stage is not European. So that's one of the first things that we have a problem with. The question is, how do you solve for that? Well, you need more people to build growth stage funds. That's one aspect of it. But we also need to have companies that are good enough to be financed at that stage. So it's the entire funnel that needs to be rethink. The second thing is on the other side is at the pre-seed. I've heard a lot of LPs said, okay, we don't have enough pre-seed investors, so people that are coming super early, companies that don't have product, don't have revenue, nothing, just like two people and an idea, and we kind of lack enough people to finance those companies. The caveat I would put here that I've heard from Alex Bakir from Norsk and Evolve is the way he said it is we don't have a gap in terms of the financing, but more of a sophistication gap, meaning that at pre-seed for now, it's basically only non-professional investors or not institutional investors, so mostly like angels or angels group, but we don't have enough like pre-seed funds that are established only to do that and to do it super well and have all of the capabilities to support startup at that stage. So I think that's why we've seen like funds like Norsk and Evolve coming out of the ground, is because I think they want to solve for that. So these are some of the observations I see on gaps.
That's interesting. I think a lot of pre-seed funds, they are adding acceleration capabilities to the fund to help the company grow as well.
And I think you also, on your side, are building a pre-seed fund.
Yeah, and we are adding capabilities for the founders because we've noted that pre-seed is not making like thousands of bets. It's also like to be close to the founders and bringing them value and how they can build better the companies, as we've seen lots of companies at later stage being built.
And then it makes me think too about the fact that we have seen this increase of American VC firms opening up offices here in Europe, focusing on pre-seed. And I had this conversation 2 weeks ago with someone else for one of our other podcasts and talking about that. And he was saying maybe we can use it as a motivation to try to create more funds focusing on this specific funding round and on this sector. But I agree. I think keeping sovereignty that you mentioned earlier is going to be key moving forward. In a hypothetical world, if somebody bestowed upon you the title of Europe's climate tech investor, what's one of the first things that you would invest in or that you would maybe change?
What would I change? And who am I to say that? This is difficult.
It's a hypothetical, so there's no wrong answer, no right
Is there
answer.
like a sector or topic that you really want to deep dive in?
Well, difficult to say a specific sector. What I would say, though, I think is the job of a climate investor is very similar to the job of a traditional VC investor. So you have to focus on performance. That is the main criteria, and that is also the main criteria for success when we think about impact. I had someone at World Fund telling me that they are focusing on investing in companies that can reduce the CO2 emissions by 100 million tons per year per company. So that is a massive number to achieve. The reason why they do that, I believe, is because if you can get to that scale, you also have a unicorn in the making or like a very big company. So linking back performance and impact together, but focusing on performance first, I think is very important. It's a very stupid statement, maybe too basic to say, but if a company dies within 12 months, no matter the impact they want to have, if they die within 12 months, it doesn't have any impact. So focusing on companies that can perform well financially, no matter the regulation, no matter the sentiment on climate, is the most important thing I see in Europe. And that also means companies that can stand on their own 2 feet. That means companies that, again, quoting World Fund, but I love them for that, is that can sell to climate deniers, meaning you would buy the product no matter if you care about climate or not. I think that would be the things I would focus on. Then ask me where I go from this and which sector. I think that applies across sectors, right? So, but that would be the thing, like focus on performance. It's really important. That's how the ecosystem works. You're not going to get more money for your fund if it's not performing well. And obviously, it has to have a climate impact for me to invest if I were in that position. But performance remains really important. And that, I think, goes back to the concept of like interlock between revenue and impact, meaning like you want to invest in companies that if they grow their revenue, they will also grow their impact. So that would be the few things I would say.
When you're speaking to different investors, what is one thing that they're telling you matters most when they're making a decision as to whether or not they're going to invest in a climate tech startup?
Again, going back, similar principles to traditional investing, just having traction with customers or people interested in buying your product. So the way I see it, or the way I understand it from most climate VCs, is climate is a filter criteria, meaning if it's not climate, I'm not even going to look at it. From there, it's basically like a traditional investment process where you basically look at, do they have customers? Can they scale the companies? Are there the right people to do it? That being said, I think the couple of things that comes back again and again is, do you have great unit economics versus the incumbent that you're trying to go against? So meaning, can you reach cost parity with something that is less climate or more CO2 intensive? Do you have customer validation? Do people want your product? It's stupid, but it's the way it works. And then, is there real pain points? Like, are people actually suffering from not having your product in that form? And so, going back to what I was saying earlier, take the example of a company that's trying to produce, let's say, rare earth minerals in Europe. Well, the pain points is maybe in 5 years, I might not get my supply chain correctly from China or from other countries in the world because, borders have closed, whatever happens. So the pain point is, how can I secure my supply chain? It has a massive climate impact, but that's the reason why they come to you. So I think those are some of the things that investors have in mind these days when I talk to them.
And having said that and talking to dozens of investors, founders, LPs, do you think that EU has the capacity to build a worldwide champion in climate, a really big successes? I mean, we've seen some, not as many as we wished, but do you think that's something possible in the future?
Yes, of course. And I will also anyway bring a positive note to that question. But now the reason why I think Europe is well positioned for that is, first, we have the talent. So we have great universities. It's well proven in all of the ranking that you can find. Europe has the best research, or some of the best research in the world. The other thing, and I think, Damien, we were talking about that one day, is we see a lot more repeat entrepreneurs going into climate now, meaning that we have very high caliber talents. And, I have made a list before, but looked at Norskin. Norskin was founded by the co-founder of Klarna, not a climate company, right? And then you have Fuse Energy in the UK, ex-Revolut. You have Enride, I can't remember which company is behind it. You have Redwood Materials, it's in the US, but it's an ex-Tesla. Octopus Energy. So like those people that come with like a background in founding company, and that all of a sudden when they reach success and financial success, they realize, oh, actually I want to have an impact in the world. Those are the people that I think will unlock those massive returns.
Yeah, and those people are beasts of execution, and then you de-risk the investment as well.
Exactly.
Well, I want to be mindful of your time. I know we're coming towards the end of our chat this morning. One thing that we like to do at the end of all of our podcasts here at Daphne is to close it out with a round of rapid fire questions.
Okay.
We have a couple for you. I'm really curious to learn more about your skateboarding background. Who are some of the skateboarders you looked up to growing up? I'm from Southern California, so for me, like Tony Alva, Tony Hawk, Ryan Sheckler, all of them were people I enjoyed watching. Who are some of those people for you?
So many. I'll say one person, Chris Jocelyn, amazing skateboarder. If you enjoy watching skate videos, he's been named Skateboarder of the Year this year, just like as of a couple of days ago. Best videos, and also looked up to him because I was part of Ethnies as they were a sponsor of mine.
Yes,
they were also a sponsor of Chris Jocelyn, so we got to meet in person, and he's an amazing human being as well. So
Cool.
We haven't asked you that, but do you still skateboard?
Yeah,
That's the
just to move around. So I have injured myself so much skateboarding that I don't want to do it like technically anymore, but just to go around or like travel, from place A to place B. Yes.
Yeah, I have a couple of skateboarding scars, so I understand the challenge. Do you have a rapid fire question?
I just have a question, and to wrap up also everything that we said, are you still optimistic about the future?
Yes, that's what I do. I wouldn't have left a well-paid job to do what I do now, which is trying to support climate tech companies, and I'll probably do it as an investor in the near future. Very, very optimistic. I think climate as a word and a label might just disappear, but does that really matter? I don't think so. I think what matters is just build companies that have a positive impact on the world, and I think a lot more people realize that we need that now than before, and that's question of sovereignty and other stuff. But very, very optimistic.
That's cool. We need some optimistic
I like that
minds
answer.
to keep going.
No, and I think you have to remain optimistic and hopeful with something as big and as important as this topic. So it's nice to hear this sense of optimism. Where do you hope to see New Wave in the next 5 years?
I mean, it has to be, it will be the number one podcast in climate investing in Europe. It has to attract the best people in the industry. And it has to be the platform where if people have either questions or things to say, they come to. So both as speakers, if they have something important to say, they need to come to New Wave when they want to talk about climate investing. And then if they want to hear about the stories, they need to come to New Wave. So that's where I see it. More from a company's perspective, I would hope that, I can hire a few more people to help me make the best content. So let's see where we are in 5 years.
Love it. Do you have a final question?
Yeah, if you could shout out a message to the people to make them more interested in climate tech, or what would it be like if you have the just one message to pass to everyone?
Think about it this way: the climate crisis is a humanitarian crisis. The planet is going to live long after we die, so it's all about us as humans, not about the planet. And if you think about it from that perspective, that might motivate a few more people.
Very well said. Well, were you going to say something?
No, I would say just drop the mic.
Yes. Well, that's a good place to end it. Hugo, thank you so much for spending time with us today. I loved learning more about you, your story, the advice you have for people looking to create media companies, where it's, asking questions, diving in all the way, being very intentional with finding your purpose, and also hearing about your optimism and your reflections for the state and future of climate tech in Europe. So thank you so much for your time.
Pleasure is mine.
Thank you.
And thank you, Demia, for joining us in this conversation. And a big thanks to our listeners. We'll see you back soon for another episode of Movers and Shakers.